So good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event. As you know, this is part of the series of events that we have organized alongside the Shaping Space exhibition, which is a collaboration between the V&A and the Building Center and is hosted by the Building Center. I am Simona Valeriani. I work for the V&A Research Institute, and I'm one of the co-curators of the exhibition, together with my colleagues at the Building Center, Vanessa Norwood and Mathilde Savary and Harriet Jennings. We are together this evening to kick off our series of 3 events that are aimed at people who are interested in pedagogical practices linked to architecture and the built environment. In particular, this evening, we have the honor of being joined by colleagues all the way from Oslo, being with us to discuss their experience with a project into architecture, which has been run over the years by our speakers. Both at the Design and Architecture Norway and the Norwegian National Museum, which has been engaging teens and children of all ages with architecture and the environment. And after Alf Howlid and Karianne Ommundsen will have spoken to us, we will also have a contribution by Rebecca Guzy, who is has been doing some teaching for us alongside the Shaping Space exhibition in our educational workshops. So it's a rich program. We will have questions in the end. Please do feel free to share your questions and thoughts in the chat, and I will pick them up and pose them to the speakers at the end when all 3 of them will have given their contributions. We will have shorter contribution by 2 shorter contribution to begin and to end with, and a slightly longer contribution in the middle by Alf, so that you have a kind of a sense of what the structure of the evening is. Thank you very much for being with us. And the first person to speak will be Karianne. And I'll introduce her in a second. So Karianne joins us from Oslo. She has a master's degree in history and 1 in fine arts from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And she has previously worked as a freelance writer and educator for various institutions, and also been an assistant professor for students in art history. And since 2012, she's been working at the National Museum in Oslo, mainly working for temporary exhibition and public program, and also in the education program. Since 2021, she coordinates the team of educators. And the mission of this team is to make the museum an essential source of inspiration and knowledge for pupils, students, and teachers in Norway. So we are looking forward to hearing from Karianne of her experience. The floor is yours, Karianne.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the introduction and for inviting both me and Alf Howlid to this event. So like Simona said, I have been working at the National Museum since 2012. And now, 10 years later, we are opening the new National Museum here in Oslo. This is designed by the architectural firm Claus & Schuhwerk. The new National Museum, it will be the largest art museum in the Nordic countries, and we will have art, architecture, and design all under one roof. So with the new large exhibition areas, we will be able to exhibit more of our collection than ever before. And we will also be able to extend our program of temporary exhibitions. So you're more than welcome to visit Oslo and the new National Museum this summer. So what I will do today is to present the educational program of the National Museum, focusing specifically on architecture and on the program that we call the Census. I will also share some thoughts about the relationship between art museums and schools and how museums can contribute and support children's learning. So then I will try to share a presentation. All right. Okay. So a museum is, according to the current definition, a non-profit permanent institution in the service of society and its development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education and also for enjoyment. So art museums, they're usually guided by ideals laid out in a statement of missions. The objectives of the National Museum of Norway are to make art accessible to each and everyone and to reflect the society and the era in which we live. And this image right here, it kind of represents the beginning of the National Museum. It was established in 1837 in order to civilize and shape the cultural identity of a newly formed nation. At that time, art was considered the safest and surest civilizer. By having its own national museum and collection of art, Norway was aiming at becoming a part of modern Europe. Just a moment. From the beginning, the museum was designed to teach and to educate the public. It was stated that the museum should instruct young artists and to nurture their sense of beauty. In that way, one could say that the National Museum, it was inherently educational from its birth. After the Second World War, the educational activities at the National Museum increased, like other European countries. As one of the first museums in Norway, the National Museum hired a museum educator. Her name was Aslaug Bluth. I'm sorry for the typo. Bluth was a leading art historian and educator in Norway and established an organization called Art in School that aimed at improving the relationship between art museums and schools. During her career, she wrote about education or the educational potential of museums in different kinds of publications, books, newspapers. And she wrote this article, School Visits, where she's claiming that school visit encourages children to understand, appreciate, and enjoy art. In Norway, like in many other countries, she wrote, we recognize that art has an important role in the development of mankind and gives great health benefits. Art offers balance and harmony in a restless and over-mechanized world. And now, 50 years later, children represent one of the major visitor groups at the museum. Research showed that teachers seem to regard museum visits as important for the development of children and for their understanding. The museum is a kind of different educational facility that can support and supplement school teaching. Like the philosopher and educator John Dewey wrote years ago, the museum can offer something different from desk, from blackboards, and from a small schoolyard. Through its emphasis on learning by doing, museums can allow children to vent their constructive impulses. The mission of the museum team that I'm coordinating is to make the museum an indispensable source of knowledge and inspiration for teachers and school children. Personally, I think that museum visits are important because it offers or it gives all children access to high quality art experiences, regardless of their socioeconomic background. All educational programs at the National Museums, they are for free. And sometimes the schools are offered a free bus that can drive them back and forward to the museum. In 2003, the National Gallery, the Museum of Architecture, the Museum of Decorative Arts and Design, and the Museum of Contemporary Art they all merged into one institution. Some of the previous venues were closed, but the Museum of Architecture kept being open and will still have its own venue after this new building will open. The museum that you see in this image right here, it is located at what is called the Bankplass, the Bank Square in Oslo. So it was a previous bank building from the 1830s that was renovated and reopened in 2008. The building is a combination of classicism and modernism, a meeting between two central architects in Norwegian art history, Sverre Fehn and Christian Grosch. And here you can see a more recent photo of the museum with the pavilion by Fehn in the back. So right now we are installing a new exhibition about the relationship between Scandinavian design and the US inside this pavilion. So the project that I'm going to talk more about is what we call Sansene or Census. And it usually starts inside the Museum of Architecture. And here you can see our workshop space that was also renovated before it reopened in 2008. And it has this kind of beautiful atmosphere. It's a really nice space to work in with wooden kind of furniture inside. So this is a space we often use for activities for families, but also for school children during the weekdays. But due to the pandemic and social distancing, the level of activity it has been significantly reduced. So the Census Project was first introduced by the museum educator Eli Solsrud more than 10 years ago. One of her ambitions was to highlight the bodily experience of architecture and make children more aware of their surroundings. Today, the Census program is offered to children, usually from kindergarten, early primary school. In Norway, we are kind of lucky in a way that art and culture is considered as important for children. Already in kindergarten, it is expected that children get exposed to different art forms and get the opportunity to explore, investigate, and experiment creatively. They also learn about the 5 senses quite early. In general, one might say that children, they understand, use, and experience architecture different from adults. They act as architects in their own right when they build sandcastles, when they create blanket forts on the tables. Often children respond to the world and their immediate surroundings through play. So the Census program, it includes different kind of census activities and games, encouraging children to reflect about what architecture looks like, what it hears like, feels like, smells like, and maybe even tastes like in a playful way. The Census program, it lasts usually for about an hour and is taught by the museum guides and also the education curators. To make children feel comfortable and safe, we sometimes start by singing a song or telling a fairy tale, sitting in a circle on the floor of the workshop. In Norway, we have a census song that is maybe similar to this one you see here in English, that I have 2 eyes so I can see, and a nose to smell, and so on. So we usually sing the song together, sometimes while pointing at our eyes, our nose, our mouth, and so on. The fairy tale we sometimes use, that is Little Red Riding Hood. And we especially focus on the dialogue between the girl and the wolf, when it kind of relates to the different senses, like what big eyes you have or what big mouth you have. While we are still sitting in a circle, the children are introduced to a blindfold sensory game. While their eyes are covered, they're given different objects to touch and to smell, like bricks, wood, and everyday objects. Afterwards, we ask them to guess what they just were in contact with. These kind of blindfold exercises, they can be very fun, exciting, and engaging, and help children become more aware or familiar with their senses. It can also easily be done in a classroom, and the same goes for the next exercise we use. We build textile forts under the tables and then talk afterwards about how we are affected by the space we inhabit. And then we keep on moving around the museum on a sensory tour. So we explore the space of the entrance, like you see here. We explore the pavilion, and then we enter the vault and talk about how it feels to be in these kind of rooms. And here you can see the vault. And in a way, when we're on this tour, it's kind of like the architecture or the building itself is a pedagogical tool. It communicates, it tells a story. It is not at all neutral. And while being inside this vault, we also sometimes tell the story about when the bank was robbed in the mid-1800s. That usually excites children. And they're quite curious about the look of this room since it's so particular. And what you see in this image is actually from an exhibition that was called The Room of Senses that was presented at the museum a couple of years ago. The last exercise that we do is a mirror exercise. The children are moving through the museum while having a mirror on their nose, making them see the ceiling instead of the floor while they're walking. So some of the children find this exercise a little bit uncomfortable since the sense of space is being distorted, but most of them think that this exercise is very fun. So the Census program is an example of a phenomenological learning experience for children in a museum context, focusing on dialogue and interactivity. It invites children to reflect and respond using their own bodies and senses. Especially for young children, we believe that learning by doing in the tradition of John Dewey is essential. Nevertheless, this does not mean that this is the only learning strategy of the museum. We have a large department with around 30 education curators and a growing staff of museum guides. Some of them have years of experience teaching philosophy for children and represent what might be called a critical tradition in the museum education program. Others, they have background as artists and teach what they call art-based education. In the department, we also have our own digital team working on making our collection available for the wider public all over the country. I would also like to emphasize that we are continuously trying to improve our relationship to schools. We have organized many teachers events similar to this one, but lately we have also tried to collaborate directly with teachers. Team Education is currently working closely with 2 teachers from 2 different schools in Oslo that helps us develop and improve our education program. So the plan is also to involve the children that they are teaching. So if we want to become an essential source of inspiration for teachers and for school children, we need to make sure that we are relevant and that our education program is in a way in line with the school curriculum. In 2020, a new curriculum was introduced here in Norway with very few concrete learning goals or objectives, and with an emphasis on creativity and critical thinking. It states that art and creativity enrich society. The new National Museum will have a lot to offer for children. Children will actually be the first visitor group to enter the museum. For the pre-opening program, we're planning to invite schools from different areas of the country to visit the museum before it opens officially for the public. Inside, they will find different kind of activities to do in the exhibition space, interactive installation like this fairy tale room, and workshop like the one me and Alf is in right now. So when the new National Museum opens, we will have a variety of activities for children, thereby trying to fulfill the crucial mission to engage our audience and to educate. So I hope to see you here very soon. Thank you.
So I've seen, thank you very much for your presentation, Karianne. That was, oh, sorry, I hadn't mind. Sorry, I wasn't on screen. Thank you very much, Karianne, for your presentation. That was really interesting and really on point with what we have been trying to do alongside the exhibition, that is to think about how learning through bodily experience and through making can enhance children's development. So thank you very, very much for that. And I'm sure there will be more questions, but we will answer them at the end. I've seen that somebody in the chat asked if there will be a recording. Yes, we are recording this, and we will post it later, a couple of days after it has happened. So watch this space, it will be available. For now, we move on to the next presentation, and I invite Alf Howlid to join us on screen. Alf is, hello, welcome.
Hello.
Alf is an architect and former senior advisor at Design and Architecture Norway. He has many years of experience as instructor in schools and colleges, and now collaborates with the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design Norway. He's the author of the book In Architecturen. I'm not sure I pronounce it properly in Norwegian, but that is translated into English into architecture, which explains his experience on the project Into Architecture. So an experience-based introduction to the art of building, which is what he will present now for us. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and we look forward to your presentation.
It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. I am as hard as I can pretending that you are here with us in the same room. And that it's a sort of obligation for me, because my concept, or the concept of architecture presentation, which I will give you a little glimpse of, is the core idea is that we try to experience architecture, and what is going on in the room where we are is the whole thing and the real thing. Because in presentation or teaching architecture for young people, we have some difficulties normally. First of all, as teachers, we have to pose some questions. That is, the first one is, why are we doing this? Why are we presenting architecture to young children or to youngsters? The next one is, if we find out that it's a good reason for teaching architecture, then what in architecture is worthwhile dealing with? What is of importance for the young to take part in and to experience? And the last question is, how do we do this? So that's a methodological question, and a question of didactics. And I have been working with this for so many years, and you have to, in a way, make a choice, because if you ask architects what is important in architecture, you get very, very different answers. And most of them say that, well, the real core of architecture is the aesthetical, what is the real architectural component in building? And to my experience, that is a very difficult question. And it's very difficult to teach and to work with that with young people. So many of the main questions or important parts of architecture you can introduce to young people when they are almost grown-ups. But the difficult age is the teenagers of 13, 14, 15. That's also the pedagogical that's the age where you need all you know about pedagogy to really to get them hooked to the theme. So the first dilemma is to teach architecture. Normally you do that with models, drawings, and pictures. And to understand that, to really to understand what is going on in architecture by these abstract representations of architecture, you have to have some knowledge, and the young people, they don't have this knowledge. So this is a real challenge. And if you go to the other side, the architecture, the real thing, the buildings itself, those to go there with youngsters and to tell them about architecture is also quite difficult, because the buildings are often very full of compromises and reasons for why it has become in this specific way. And you also have to have some knowledge to understand. You have to understand the principles of architecture, and the children, they don't have that. Mostly of the grown-ups either, they don't have this. But so this is the dilemma, and what I have worked with and chosen is that we have to find some sort of reality between the abstract representation of architecture and the real thing, the building itself. So now I will present some pictures for you to get a glimpse of what this concept into architecture is. And afterwards, we will deal with one specific pedagogical situation, which might be helpful for you if you should try to do something of this. So, yes, you see this picture. This is the architectural workshop where youngsters work with equipment. So what can we see? First, we see children or young people fond of what they are doing. They are in it, in the situation with all themselves. What else do we see? Yes, we see they're using their forces, arms and legs. What else do we see? We see that they are, in a way, making a construction, taking part with their bodies, their forces, in the construction. And with this long rod, they are making a construction or a piece of architecture. What is interesting? Yes, it is that they have to be many to do this. And the architecture is not there, or the construction is not there, unless everyone is doing their part. So the architecture in this situation is a sort of co-working of different elements in a whole. A very specific phenomenon and a very characteristic phenomenon of architecture. So now I present some pictures going through this concept, and you will you will see that there is not much that we need. Here you can go into the forest and get a rod if you don't find it in the shop, but you see, and there we use it as a sort of introduction exercise of compression and tension. We are using that, and here you see we are introducing collaboration of human forces, arms and legs, and the ability of the wooden rod to take part in a construction where forces are used. Here we have, well, we go very, very quickly about that. Now here, this is a pyramid. We build a pyramid. This you can do with quite young children. Here we have the columns and the Greek period. We can make spaces. Now we are into the arch construction, and we are using building blocks. Not the building blocks, they are not dangerous, but they are heavy enough to be used in some sort of construction. This is when tension principle is added to the bow, like in Brunelleschi's cupola in Firenze, which is a very, very interesting experiment. Now we are into the framework situation with the Eiffel Tower and the light constructions. Here we try out how triangles could be the staple element of framework. This is the interior of the Design and Architecture Norway in Oslo, where I've been working for 20 years. Here we work with joints, building quite big constructions, trying out the framework laws. This is interesting because now we are heading towards the modern situation where the armed concrete, the reinforced concrete is used when you can make construction which reach out on the other side of the walls or the columns. Here we experiment with fabric in several ways to make different spaces. Now we have to be a bit grown-ups. Here we have some youngsters inviting the small children to experience a corridor and to experience a roof. Here is outside in a school. Here we find out what is the perspective by making a long wall. And you see that all these things is possible. It's only possible if we are many taking part. You can't do this before sitting at your computer, and you can't do this on your own. You have to be many that works together, and you have to collaborate in a way that you very seldom experience in your daily life. But as you see, all these experiments, all these constructions, are real things in themselves. You experiment, you experience the architecture and the constructions here and now in the room, because the elements are so big that it's no longer a model, it's a real construction. And in the same time, it's important that it is representing the great architecture, great buildings in its principles. So then these workshop events are introduced by the teacher telling a story about the buildings, so that the children and youngsters, they can imagine what you are aiming at and what the architecture is all about. And then you do the experiments to really do it in real life, what is going on. So this is about the last thing. And you see, as long as the workshop is going on, we have three elements. First is the storytelling. You tell the children about the architecture. And during the story, you turn around and you do a very, very quick drawing. A very quick drawing. And it's so simple and so quick that it doesn't disturb the story. But, and even if the drawing is very simple, the more simple it is, the more so-called helpless or naive, the better, because then the students have to imagine and to add what the drawing does not tell. So this is a dynamic process that it's not so that the architecture is discovered like that. When you present a picture, it's presented. You start with some, you take out some characteristics and you describe it like you describe a scene in a theater. And then during what you're doing and the drawings and the workshop constructions, the piece of architecture, which is the topic, even if it's Pantheon or Brunelleschi's cupola, or it is the Eiffel Tower, or it is the armed concrete buildings of Corbusier, it emerged very slowly. So your image of, or your knowledge about this architecture is a result of a work that everyone has to do. So, ska vi... Then I intend to ser de hele nå?
Ja.
Nå kan de se hele.
Ja.
You saw the first picture. You remember the picture of those who had this rod, this long rod. And then you can see that this long rod, it is so that this long rod is, they are two children or two youngsters are holding this rod like that. And you can go to this rod and you put your hand here and you find out that it's not stable. It's very unstable. And you ask them, what can we do to reinforce or to strengthen this construction? And then they come up and they try to do several things. So sooner or later, someone finds out that it is the way of doing this is that we do. We have this rod, and now these children are standing like that, and then we have one who has to reinforce these here. So, and now we have come to a point, I do it very quickly because I have only half an hour. But this is a very important point of that experience, because now you see that what are we really doing? We are building a Gothic cathedral. So you go into this construction, see, pretending this is a big room, and we have a construction here. how can we really make a construction without destroying this room in between? And then after a while, you find out this here, that you have to press on their shoulders for these standing there, and those here, they can just lean on the people back, and they just have to rely on their bones. And that's important, because in their bones they have these pressure forces ability in the bones, and the tension is in the muscles. And so here in many of these muscles here, you have the tension forces. You remember the situation here with these two here. You have one who is holding here, and the other one is pressing down. So the one who is pressing down are using mostly the bones, rely on the bones. The one that is keeping up here is the one that using their muscles. So now we have a real experience of tension and compression. And if you look at these two here, these two rods, you find out that we have a tension forces which the wood is handling, and you have the compression forces in the bottom, where the wooden piece, the piece of wood also managed to consist. So when this is a stable construction, you find out that you have tension and compression forces all over in this situation. And as you know, the forces in the architecture, the construction, is tension and compression. And the development of architecture is a question of how do they handle with tension and compression forces in big buildings. So the architecture is moving forward by new technology, new material, and new architectural subjects. Now, if you tell the children, because here, this is what they do here, is a reality for itself. If you now introduce that there is the Gothic Cathedral. Have you ever been to, for instance, in Chartres? You come in the landscape and something appears in the horizon. You come a little bit further and you see there is something coming up. You come a little bit further and you have the cathedral, but still in the landscape. You come a little bit further and you see the city of Chartres, and you have the cathedral on the top. And when you are inside in a street going up on the hills, you don't even see the cathedral. But when you come up, you see this wonderful building. This was a bit what I this was a bit outside. Okay. So you find these cathedral like that. And man is something like that. And when you come into this cathedral, you really experience a very, very odd thing, which is it's coming light into it. And you wouldn't expect that in a stone building. But you understand this if you come to the outside, because on the outside there are towers, stand like this. And from these towers, there are both over to the main wall. And there is a lovely, then you can tell the story about how they build these things. That you have to use scaffolds under every bow in the whole church. And when the scaffolds are taken down, there is a moment of very great, this is a great moment, because when you take away all the scaffolds which are in this construction under all these things, the stones are leaning to each other. And in the building period, you have the wooden constructions which are taking the loads. Now, you can see here, we have this here, you see. And now the children, depends on age, see, ah, yeah, this is what we did. So these constructions on the outside, they are doing the same thing. And they are pressing like big giants hidden in the structure itself that keeps this building from falling down. And then you can see what happens if you one of these do like that. I take a break. So many possibilities to discuss what is really going on in the construction. For young children, this is enough. I mean, you can do this here. You can do this construction, and you can use not only 2 or 4 or 8, but you can use 16 and a long rod. And there is one, as you see, you can have either the teacher or someone else could hang itself here and be the load of the construction. And if you have done this experiment and you are working with, I mean, youngsters, 17, 18-year-olds, then there is a question of what is the characteristic of this construction in the history of architecture? What is before, what is coming? Now, you can introduce the question of a skeleton. The wall is not longer the main construction as all the buildings before, and the buildings coming afterwards. The construction is separating from the walls. So there's a very important period in the history of architecture. And these conceptual or contests, discussing this in the context of architecture history, you have to do that with grown-ups. But it's always relevant to start with the real experiment. So this was a quick introduction to something which I normally work for some hours, 2 days for young people. And well, there might be some questions, but we take that afterwards. So thank you. This was what I would like to present for you now.
Thank you very much, Alf. That was brilliant. An introduction to how to share with children the experience of being the architecture. And very much along those lines, we will now hear from Rebecca of the kind of experimental work that we have done with kids, with them also being the architecture, but in a quite different context. So thank you very much, and we will come back with question to you in a minute when Rebecca is has done her presentation. And Rebecca Guzy is an educational designer. She has many years of experience as a DT teacher, so design and technology teacher in the UK, has a master's in the history of design, and is been the learning coordinator for our Shaping Space project, but also at the same time, she is working for the Craft Council and doing some other work as a freelance. So she is full of energy and full of ideas, and has designed for us the educational program, and these are some of the things she has been up to. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Simona. This has been a fabulous conference so far, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed hearing from other speakers. So I'm actually going to talk to you about how we developed our educational programme for Shaping Space Architectural Models Revealed. We were very conscious that we wanted to explore how to use and develop our body's tacit and embodied understanding of the environment. We wanted to explore how we could do this to support our core educational themes of narrative and model making and understanding of technical model making materials. For me, as an educational designer, I see the exploration of tacit and embodied knowledge and the use of the body in the creative process as crucial for learners. By that I mean a pedagogy that encourages the learner to explore objects with their hands, model their thinking with tools and materials, and build their understanding through the use of their bodies. It's a type of discovery learning that asks learners to solve problems in the physical environment. So what does this actually mean for planning learning activities? Well, when designing this type of activity, I always take a materials first approach. By this I mean, the first thing I consider is the materials, spaces and artifacts that I want the learners to discover. I develop a broad learning target or brief, and I support the brief with some, but not excessive contextual knowledge. For example, I would support some of the activities that I want to talk about with mathematical information on how to scale measurements, and then let the learners explore towards solving the brief. For me, this really offers a multimodal approach to developing and demonstrating understanding, and it does not require learners to write down their knowledge. This type of learning gives learners different tools for demonstrating what they know that doesn't even necessarily need to be supported by words. Through interaction with spaces, materials and bodies, learners are encouraged to take risks with their creative processes, collaborate on ideas and develop their communication skills. This approach works best with malleable and familiar materials. However, it can be applied to using new processes and unfamiliar materials with appropriate support and scaffolding. Architecture and architectural model making, for me, was a perfect space to explore how to encourage multiple modes of learning as an approach to experience different material spaces, to get the learners to experience different materials, spaces and their own bodies as tangible materials for communication. It also encourages learners to explore and test their understanding, often in a non-linear way, which I particularly enjoy to teach. Through the education programme on Shaping Space, we explored how learners could work with their bodies to understand the concepts and spaces, and then apply their knowledge and understanding gained from this experience in making practice. So the first workshop I'm going to talk to you about, and I'm going to take you through two workshops and how I delivered these. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is one that I delivered with a primary school. The aim of this was to develop learners' understanding of space and our place in it. As part of the first workshop, we ran with a group of Key Stage 2 students, so they're around about 8 to 9 years old. We brought this group of around 30 learners into the building centre for an exhibition tour and practical workshop. Our aim was to introduce the learners to the concept of designed space and designing space through model making. For this activity, we had to start with the assumption that learners had not critically engaged with the idea of the built environment and its design. We assumed that, although the learners have experience of living in design spaces, they had not considered how that related to their bodies and how their bodies moved through these spaces because of design. First up was the first thing that we did was an exhibition tour. We wanted learners to have the context, to have this as the context for when we discussed architectural models. And when we were giving this tour, we discussed different types of models in the exhibition, the different ways that they demonstrated the design of space and the different materials they used. One focus was on an interactive model of Bloomsbury that projected changes over time. We then, as a whole cohort, walked through to Russell Square, which is maybe about a 10-minute walk away from the building centre. And here, learners were asked to consider the built environment around them. This combination of development of contextual understanding and relating that experience to the physical world was further embedded through an activity focused on the body as a material for building. The learners were told that they would be modelling Russell Square using a variety of modelling materials, but to help them plan how this would look, they were asked to try to represent the buildings with their bodies that surrounded the square. Although this sounds quite bizarre, asking learners to imitate the buildings they can see in a public space, they really went for it. They didn't hold back at all. And actually the activity went on for much longer than planned. As part of the activity, I saw learners demonstrate to each other how to make the shapes with their bodies. I watched them organise themselves and problem solve to get their desired shapes, and then to expand the task where they started to consider things beyond the buildings and wanted to then represent fountains and tree arches, which is not what I'd originally asked them to do. And whilst this was all very exciting, it was seeing that the learners turn that new understanding that they had gathered through using their bodies and interacting with the built environment into something physical that they then went on and made. Every group had the same brief. They had a mix of materials commonly used in architectural model making, and they were to make a bird's eye view of Russell Square, and that it was to be no bigger than 30 centimetres squared. But every group approached this differently, as you can see. Their work reflected their different understanding and that had been driven through their embodied experience and developed with tacit engagement with materials. The second workshop I want to discuss was delivered to students from a secondary school, but this time introducing different tools that required physical interaction. During a workshop with Key Stage 3 students, so roughly around about 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, we considered how we design and test models that use triangulation and tension to work. They were asked to model a cantilever bridge using a system of ropes and planks of wood that had historically been used to test and demonstrate this idea and this principle by architects John Fowler and Benjamin Baker. Learners were again given a tour of the exhibition and asked to focus on models and images that use triangulation, and were given some contextual background of the uses of forces in the design of cantilever bridges. It was a problem-solving task that required the use and placement of bodies to make the bridge. Diagrams of how the bridges use tension to support weight were left on the projector, and all teachers and adults in the room were instructed to watch and to not intervene. It took the learners about 25 minutes to figure out how to do it, swapping people in and out to make sure that they were the same height and could support the tension well. For teachers, it's a great moment when you don't actually have to teach through intervention and direction during a task, but still get to watch the learning unfold. Again, the learners were asked to use that knowledge and understanding to build a tower to withstand as much force as possible, therefore building and demonstrating their knowledge and understanding. So this is what I have learned through delivering these sets of workshops. As an educator, considering all of the current landscape in the UK, it's really easy for me to anticipate that learners will not be engaged with using their body as a form of expression. This would be entirely wrong. Learners, especially young learners, are not as risk adverse as I thought that they would be, and they relished the tasks that I gave them. Given a problem, that can be considered and solved using materials. Most student engagement is high. Transferring complicated theoretical concepts such as tension into practical work embeds knowledge and understanding, and I saw it in every student's work. Multimodal consideration in education planning gives learners agency and autonomy over how they demonstrate the knowledge, and this generally works very well, often creating an atmosphere of deep learning, collaboration and creativity. But most importantly, it's also actually a very joyful way to learn and to teach. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was really interesting and gave us a good overview of the different ways in which you've used modern making and the body to teach architectural principle and about the built environment to children of different ages or learners at different ages. For the moment, I can't see any questions yet in the chat. Please do use the chat to ask questions if you would like of all three speakers. For the moment, I will start by asking first a question for our colleagues from Oslo, which is if you could give us a bit of a sense of what a collaboration, what kind of intensity a collaboration with a school has. The workshop that we have organized with Shaping Space, we were organized along a pattern that each school would have 3 interactions with us, because we had the impression that only a sustained interaction with the project would really give enough content and sustained kind of engagement with the task at hand to have a profound impact on the learners. But I was wondering what your experience is in terms of, we could do it because it was linked to an exhibition. It was not a one-off, but it was a temporary exhibition. But I'm curious to see what you do, if the workshop you do with the Census Project, Karianne, and also the general project with Into Architecture. Do the students come back several times? So is it a process that builds one session to the other, or can it also be a one-off?
I can start by answering. Previously, we had different ways of doing this, and for engaging schools, we had one project at the Museum of Contemporary Art where we had, it was called Boomerang. So it was about students coming back every year. And in that way, we could gather a lot of knowledge about what worked the last time and where they're at. But what we have outside of that, we mostly have people coming once on a specific project. And if they come back, they might try something else. So that's something that I kind of miss, the possibility to follow students or children over many years as they develop with kind of the same framework. But that's something that we haven't done for the last years after the Museum of Contemporary Art closed down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add that this is a very difficult question, because we have 60,000 9-year-olds in Norway, and they're living all over Norway. So there is a very, very little percentage that could come here to experience something. That means that we have not in Norway really found out what is convenient or a good teaching of architecture in Norway. There is in the curriculum, but the teachers, they don't really know what to do. And there is an obligation, I think, for institutions like the National Museum to develop something which might be adapted in school, not only that you invite people coming and to experience something, because that might be good for those people, those pupils that come, but you have to, in a way, have bigger ambitions. So I think the key question is, how do we develop some sort of education which you can export or take into the schools, and then the students of those who were studying to be a teacher, those are a very, very important aim group for the work that we do. That's my opinion. So in a way, we are in the phase of trying and failing. So we have to develop something and try out in the schools what is really possible to implement in the school daily work. And then it has to be some sort of developing some sort of collaboration between teachers who are in the field and the professionals who can work with new concepts.
And I can also just add that since we're a museum for the entire country, we have projects that are traveling. So that's also a different way to reach out to more teachers and learners. So we have traveling exhibitions and school programs that reach quite widely.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, I was wondering if you could also add something in terms of your own experience and tell something about how legacy material will develop from what you did alongside the exhibition, how you see this, being something that can be repeated to some extent independently from the exhibition.
Yeah, I would echo what Alpha said about, the importance of actually supporting teachers' development to deliver education programs that reflect practice. So when we were deciding that we wanted to have sustained interaction with students, it wasn't just sustained interaction with students, it was with teachers. And so we wanted to be able to model some of the pedagogy that I talked about, so that teachers could replicate that in their classroom and to take that on board and to skill up, so that they got to spend a significant amount of time with somebody, a different practitioner. But we also, when we were doing this as well, when we were planning all of this, all of the plans became legacy materials. So we've actually built a set of materials that can be replicated now in school that use this principle of embodied and tacit pedagogy that encourages students to interact physically with their environment and have a hands-on experience. And so that legacy material, which will live beyond the exhibition and beyond the project, is something that is free for the teachers to then take away, and teachers that didn't get to experience the workshops and the exhibition, so that they can replicate those activities in their classroom, which I think is a really important thing as well, that you think about actually how you transfer this into something that becomes more permanent.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And also I was wondering if any of you can comment on the different ages that you are reaching out to. For example, maybe this time we can start with Rebecca and then go to the Oslo colleagues. In terms of, you have run different workshops for different age groups, and I have the impression that some of them are age specific, but some of them can also be adapted quite easily. Am I right?
Yeah, I think because of the way that we design, well, to be really clear, it is collaborative design. Like, I took a lot of cues from both Simona and Marta and Vanessa and Harriet on the project. It was about skill first, so actually it was experience first. So even though we were doing lots of different, we were working with lots of different age groups, actually you should be able to build on every workshop and take that through your educational career. So we started with Key Stage 2, which are like kids that are 8 years old. And we said, right, okay, we're going to start just by real like big concepts of architecture around town planning, building of spaces, designing of spaces. And then we moved into Key Stage 3, which we then started talking about tensions and forces and a lot more technical language. And then into another older year group for 15 and 16-year-olds, we also then talked about the different materials, and we actually taught them how to make bioplastics. So actually, if you were to be taught those year after year as part of your education program, that they would sequentially add on to each other. But because of the way that we approached it, it does also mean that if you were teaching maybe a younger age set and you were confident with delivering bioplastics in the classroom, it was completely accessible.
Thank you. And before we go over to the colleagues in Oslo, I have a question in the chat that is relating to what you are talking about. So maybe we go to that first. So Paul asks how you interconnect with key environmental aspects of design impact. And that, I mean, because you were talking about materials and bioplastic, that's maybe a good moment to speak about that.
I can't talk about the like really big impacts of architectural design and construction, because I'm not an architect, but very specifically when we were designing these workshops, we predominantly used reclaimed materials or reusable biodegradable materials, natural materials. We avoided the use of plastics, especially one-use plastics, and I actually kind of rationed the materials to the students. I was just very much like, you are only having this, and like giving them like an A4 sheet of corrugated card to complete your model, so that you have to understand actually the concept that of what waste is, and if you misuse it, it's going to impact how you can progress. But I think the best thing that we did in terms of having that conversation, especially around architectural model making practices, was that, and you know, how architectural models are made, we did cast with bioplastics. So we had a very in-depth conversation about, you know, why it's important to use something that is biodegradable but has a very short shelf life. So the bioplastics that we used would completely biodegrade within a maximum of 2 months. So you're creating something that you know is not going to last permanently. And having that conversation in a classroom was really powerful, but also saying to the students as well, like, this is not science yet, we are progressing to this. This is material design. You are part of that process. Experiment with it. See what happens when you add in additional additives. But that's I think that's how we kind of tackled the environmental aspects of this design challenges.
Okay, Paul says, thank you for your insights, joining the dots. So we thank you, Paul, for your question. And now we go over to the colleagues in Oslo, and if you could also elaborate on these two aspects, that would be brilliant. So on the one hand, Paul's question, if you have any experience of using your workshops and around the topic of architecture to address environmental aspects of design and its impact?
Yeah, I can start. I remember we had a couple of years ago an exhibition about landscape architecture where we encouraged children to build an outdoor environment, thinking about the climate crisis, for example. And for that project, we only used reused materials. So we actually used materials from the previous exhibition in order to make green parks for the area of Oslo. So that's an example. And for the new National Museum, we're constantly thinking about what kind of materials we take in, what we use in our studio space, and how to handle the waste. So that's more of an internal practice that we have. And we also have a new educational program with animation that will also tackles issues of nature and of climate. So that's one way we're dealing with that. Do you want to comment that before the issue of the climate or environment?
Yeah, come on also.
And also you had a question about ages. So when it comes to Sansene or the census program, that was specifically designed for younger kids. And that's one of the few projects we had that didn't develop into something that was used also for older learners or children. So that was kind of restricted to that age. And I think that has something to do with the particular exercises we did. But we see that it has some potential to be for some older children as well. But for most of our programs, we try to make them fit all the different ages. So we ask different kind of questions and also have different kind of workshop that is specifically designed for the age group that is coming and participating in the program.
Yeah.
The question of age groups is quite interesting because it is, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you teaching architecture? And as far as I see this, there are two main goals. One is that these young people as grown-ups will be decision makers, and they have to have the best knowledge and experience to take part in these democratic situations when they're grown up. That is the one thing. The other thing is that what you present them during their childhood and during their growing up is that what you are doing, they have to feel that this is important for them. You have to reach them specifically in their situation. So that means you have to find out, what do you present them that is worthwhile presenting them? Because what they need is something that they could nourish their ability of taking part in the world, not feeling lonely, feeling that the environmentalists, that they are part of a world, and in a way dealing with what is going on in the physical world. So that is the most important aspect of architecture teaching in the school period. And so the last question you have then you have to ask, what in architecture is important for them? But it's not everything. You have to find out, and what is usable, what is pedagogical, fruitable to take into their lives, occupying their time. And then, as the last thing, you have to find out how to do this, and how to develop this work together with them that really gives them a feeling of what is going on now is a part of me, is concerning me deeply. If you don't have these ambitions, you can just quit. So everything you do with these young people has to be in this way. So that's why you have to be critical to your own teaching, because you can always have fun with children in several different ages, working with material, working with Lego, working with small blocks, making small cities, all that. But is it important? Is it important for them? That you have to pose, and this is what the teachers themselves, they have to find out in their daily life with the children. Is this important? And the professionals, well, they can support them in this work. Finding material, finding topics, finding moments in the history of architecture, in the world of architecture, which is suitable, which is helpful in the pedagogical daily life. that is how I see these things.
Thank you. We have one last question, and then I think our time is almost over. We have a question that asks if you consider discussing with the students building life cycles, so thinking about buildings having a life cycle.
A life cycle, that means?
I think what is meant is probably this idea of sorry, the word is escaping me, sustainability in a way, but also the idea that a lot of buildings have been built with a kind of expectation that they would last for a certain period of time, and then they would need either refitting or rebuilding. And how do we think about the different phases of this?
Yeah, I think that a very nice stories from the world of architecture is the vernacular architecture. So, because civilizations have dealt with extreme complicated and very sophisticated architecture and constructions, and using of materials all over the world, which are in some sort of impact and co-working with nature where they are. So this is what we might take into the school, because it's a good thing. It is very important parts of the architecture. And we know that modern architecture, like Corbusier, every one of those, they have been themselves very inspired by the vernacular architecture. And now we have, in the sense of sustainability, we are in a period where the building itself is not protecting us from nature, but is a part of nature. The wall is not a protecting topic. It is something which collaborates with nature and taking part in a circular production and circular life, being something else after it has been a wall, all that. And that is almost the same quality that you find in every vernacular architecture. So the question is, again, age group. When is it a good period to introduce modern questions of sustainable architecture? And when do you introduce ethic problems and aesthetic problems? The most important thing is, again, that what you really make an educational topic, it has to be something that finds the youngsters at home. They feel that this is important for me now. Because you can't say to the youngsters, please listen to me, because what I now tell you is important for you, and this will be important for you in the future. Give it down. This is nothing which is worthwhile dealing with youngsters. And most of these youngsters where you are working with, they are in a difficult situation. I mean, 60–70% of the world's children live in big, enormous cities and will never come out of it. They will be there for the whole life. So their environment is quite complicated. So it's an existential question, how to deal with me in this world. That's the important question of growing up. And so you have constantly to try to find, even if it's aesthetic questions or ethic questions or environmental questions, it's a question of finding things which you as a responsible grown-up present for the children and work with them.
Wonderful. Rebecca, is there anything that you feel you want to say as a last word in the last minute of our event?
I would say, to answer Paul's question as well, I wish that I had the capacity to continue that conversation with the students, and but with the focus being on architectural models, I didn't really get to the point where I got to talk about a building's life cycle, which is an important part of developing students' understanding of the built environment. And it's such a shame that it was, although 3 sessions sounds like a long time, actually I could have gone on for a term. I could have spent hours and hours and hours talking and working with those students, but it was a joy nonetheless.
Yeah, so that's one of the topics we might explore in future collaboration between the V&A and the Building Centre. You never know. Watch this space. And in terms of watch this space, please check our webpage. There are 2 more events coming up. Rebecca, do you have the dates in front of you?
One is next Wednesday, which is the 9th of March, and then I think it's another couple of weeks, and it's the 23rd of March.
Yeah, so these you would like to say one word each, what they are about?
The one on the 9th of March is looking at primary intervention, so looking at primary schools and how they can teach about architectural model making and the importance of creative engagement. And then we'll have a practical session from a doll's house maker, where we'll be actually making along to help build our skills and our imagination. And the second workshop is going to have a talk from Daniel Charney, who is who founded Fixperts, to talk more broadly around problem-based design thinking, and then a workshop from an architectural model maker.
Okay, so join us for these theoretical and practical workshops in the another 2 in the series. And we close the evening thanking the colleagues from Oslo, so Karianne and Alf. Thank you so much for joining us from afar. Thank you for sharing your experience over years and years. It has been really fascinating and inspirational for future intervention that we might come up with. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us, and I hope to see you all very soon. Goodbye, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Goodbye.